I booked the Airbnb because it looked quiet, tucked back into the woods, away from the main roads and towns. The photos showed a small cabin with simple furniture, a porch that overlooked tall trees, and a fire pit in the yard. I thought it would be a good place to get some rest, clear my head, and spend a few nights without hearing traffic or neighbors. The drive there was long, and by the time I arrived, the light was slipping behind the tree line. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires as I pulled up, and I noticed how the air felt heavier than it had back in town. It was cooler, the kind of cool that sinks in fast once the sun disappears. The cabin itself was as advertised. The wood smelled faintly damp when I opened the door, like it hadn't been used in a while. Everything was neat, though. The living space was small, with a couch and a chair, a little kitchen area, and one bedroom with a queen-sized bed. The bathroom was tiny, the shower curtain old but clean enough. I unpacked just enough to get comfortable, set my bag down by the bed, filled a glass of water in the kitchen, and tried to settle in. The woods around the place stretched far. When I stepped onto the porch before dark, I noticed how quiet it was. Not the kind of quiet you get in a neighborhood at night, but a silence that felt heavy, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the far-off rustle of leaves. The tree line seemed endless, darkening as the sky dimmed. I stayed outside for a little while, breathing the air, but I felt myself getting uneasy when the last bits of daylight faded. Inside, I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and stretched out on the couch. I thought I might read for a bit, but I was too tired. I washed up and went to bed early, thinking that the silence would help me sleep better than I had in weeks. The night was still at first. I lay there in the bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the other room the only sound. But then, somewhere between dozing off and fully sleeping, I thought I heard something faint. I told myself it was just the wind shifting through the trees. I turned on my side, pulled the blanket higher, and tried not to think about it. But the sound came again. It was so faint that at first I couldn't place it. It didn't sound like an animal. It was sharper, thinner, stretched out in a way that caught my attention immediately. It took me a few seconds to realize what it resembled. A scream. I froze in bed, listening hard. The sound had come from outside, deep in the woods. It wasn't close, but it wasn't so far away that I could ignore it. My chest felt tight as I lay still, waiting. The silence filled back in, but I couldn't shake what I had heard. Then, minutes later, it happened again. A high, distant scream that seemed swallowed by the trees. I sat up in bed, staring toward the window even though the curtains were drawn. Every part of me wanted to dismiss it as an animal, maybe a fox or something else that could make strange noises. But the more I listened, the more it sounded human. Not just a sharp call or noise, but the drawn-out sound of someone in distress. I didn't move from the bed. I pulled the blanket tighter, my body stiff, my ears straining. The screams came again, irregular, like they were carried by the wind, sometimes faint, sometimes sharper. They came in bursts, fading out as quickly as they started. I couldn't tell how far they were, but they were far enough that whoever it was, they were somewhere deep in those woods. The minutes dragged. Every time the sound returned, my body reacted the same way. Tense muscles, shallow breaths, my mind racing with possibilities. Was someone lost out there, hurt, or was something worse happening? I thought about calling someone, but who would I call? I had no cell signal in the cabin. The phone I'd left on the nightstand had been showing no service since I arrived. Even if I could reach someone, what would I say? That I heard faint screaming in the woods? I stayed like that for hours, it felt like. The pattern kept repeating: silence, then a faint scream, then silence again. Sometimes I thought it was moving farther away, other times closer. I imagined someone stumbling through the woods, calling for help, then being dragged back into silence. I imagined a group of people out there, doing something I didn't want to picture too clearly. The longer it went on, the more afraid I became to even look out the window. I couldn't bring myself to move the curtains, to see if anything was in the yard, or if someone might be standing just beyond the trees. I sat upright in the bed, listening, my mouth dry, the blanket twisted in my hands. At some point, the sound stopped. I don't know what time it was. The silence pressed back in, heavier than before, like the woods were holding their breath. I stayed awake, waiting for the screams to return, but they didn't. My body was exhausted, but my nerves kept me on edge. I don't think I ever really slept, just drifted in and out with my heart racing at every small creak the cabin made. When daylight finally came, the silence felt different. Softer, less heavy. I got out of bed slowly, every movement stiff. I walked through the cabin, checked the doors, and finally stepped out onto the porch. The woods looked ordinary in the daylight, almost calm, as if the night before had never happened. But when I looked at the ground near the edge of the trees, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. There were footprints in the dirt. Not animal tracks, but human ones. Bare feet, pressed into the soil, leading from the treeline toward the cabin. They stopped just a few yards from the porch. The dirt was disturbed in places, like someone had lingered there. I stood there, staring at the prints, the woods stretching silent beyond them. My skin prickled as I realized whoever had made them had been close enough to watch the cabin in the dark while I was inside listening to those screams. I didn't pack slowly. I grabbed my bag, shoved everything inside, and loaded the car as fast as I could. I didn't even eat breakfast. I drove back down the gravel road with the windows up, checking the mirrors every few seconds until I was back on the main road. I never went back to that Airbnb. I never even left a review. All I could think about was those faint screams in the woods and the footprints that proved someone else had been there, close enough to know I was inside. Even now, when I remember it, I wonder if the screams were real or if they were meant to draw me out of the cabin. And if I had gone outside that night, followed the sound, I don't think I would have come back. I had booked the Airbnb for 3 nights because I wanted a break from everything. The listing showed a small cabin tucked deep in the woods, away from roads and neighbors, a place that promised quiet. The pictures looked clean, nothing fancy, but the reviews all talked about how peaceful it was. That's exactly what I wanted. No noise, no people, just stillness. The drive out there had been longer than I expected. The last part of it was nothing but dirt roads winding through trees so thick that the light barely touched the ground. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, the air felt heavier, cooler, and everything around me seemed too quiet. No cars, no voices, not even the sound of distant traffic. Just trees standing close together, their branches swaying slowly. The cabin was small but decent. One room that doubled as a kitchen and living space, one bedroom, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of old pipes. The floor creaked when I walked, but everything was clean. I unpacked just enough to feel settled, set my bag near the bed, filled a glass of water in the kitchen, and sat on the couch for a while, listening to the quiet. By nightfall, the silence was starting to feel strange. I stepped outside once, onto the small porch, and noticed how thick the darkness was between the trees. It wasn't like city darkness with streetlights in the distance. It was the kind that swallowed everything, so black you couldn't see more than a few feet past the porch. I didn't stay out long. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and tried to relax. I made something simple to eat, scrolled through my phone for a while, and then got ready for bed. There was no cell signal in the cabin, but the Wi-Fi worked, and that was enough for me to message a friend to let them know I had arrived safely. I thought that would be the last time I touched my phone that night, but sometime after midnight, I woke up. First, I didn't know why. The cabin was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I reached for my phone, more out of habit than anything else, and that's when I saw it. A new message from the Airbnb host. It was short, blunt. It said, "You need to leave the property immediately." I sat up in bed, staring at the screen. I read it again and again, trying to make sense of it. The timestamp showed it had been sent just a few minutes earlier. My chest tightened as I looked around the room, the thin curtains drawn shut, the door locked but suddenly not enough. I typed back, asking why, but before I could hit send, another message came through. "Get out now. Don't wait." That's when the fear really set in. It wasn't like the host had asked politely or explained some emergency with the property. It was urgent, forceful, almost like a warning. My mind started racing with possibilities. Had something happened nearby? Was there a danger in the woods I didn't know about? Or worse, was the danger already here? I swung my legs over the side of the bed and just sat there, listening. The cabin was so quiet that I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I thought about ignoring the message, waiting until morning, but the words were stuck in my head. Leave immediately. I packed quickly, fumbling with my bag, shoving clothes and toiletries inside without care. Every creak of the floor felt louder than it should. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might already be outside, watching the cabin, waiting for me to step out. When I had everything in my bag, I stood by the door for what felt like forever, my hand on the knob, listening hard. The woods outside were silent. No insects, no owls, nothing. Just silence pressing against the walls. Finally, I opened the door. The night air was cold and damp, and the darkness hit me like a wall. My car was parked only a few feet away, but even that distance felt too far. I could barely see the outline of it in the dark. My footsteps on the porch seemed deafening, each one making me sure something out there would hear me. I forced myself to walk fast, my bag thumping against my leg, my eyes darting from the tree line to the shadows around the cabin. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. When I finally got the car unlocked, I threw my bag inside, slid into the seat, and locked the doors. I started the engine, the sound breaking the silence in a way that made me even more nervous. The headlights lit up the trees, and for a second, I thought I saw movement. Just a shadow shifting, maybe branches swaying, but my mind clung to it. I didn't wait to find out. I put the car in gear and drove down the dirt road, the gravel popping under the tires. The farther I got from the cabin, the more I realized how deep in the woods I was. The road twisted and turned, the trees pressing close on either side. My headlights reached only so far, and every dark patch between the trees felt like something could be standing there, watching. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights following me or someone running down the road. There was nothing, just my own reflection and the endless woods behind me. It took longer than I thought to reach the main road. When I finally did, I felt some of the weight lift, but not enough. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, back near a gas station on the edge of town where light spilled across the parking lot. Only then did I stop, shut the engine off, and try to breathe. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling back through the messages. They were still there, clear as day, each one from the host's account. I checked the time. Both had come just after midnight, one right after the other. The thing that unsettled me most was that no follow-up ever came. No explanation, no apology, nothing. Just those two short messages demanding I leave. Later, when I looked up the listing again, it was gone. Completely removed, like it had never existed. The host's profile wasn't there anymore either. I still don't know why they wanted me out in the middle of the night, or what would have happened if I'd stayed. All I know is the urgency in those words, the way they came without reason, and how the woods around that cabin had felt too silent, too watchful. Leaving in the dark was terrifying, but staying would have been worse. And sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder if the message really was from the host at all, or if someone else had gotten into their account and knew exactly where I was, alone in that cabin in the woods. I booked the Airbnb because I needed quiet. I'd been working nonstop, barely sleeping, and I wanted someplace far from the city, far from noise. The listing showed a small cabin in the woods, with a gravel drive leading into tall trees. It looked simple, nothing fancy, but the reviews said it was peaceful and private. That was enough for me. The drive out took hours, and the last stretch was only dirt road, the kind where the trees crowd in so close they scrape the sides of your car if you drift too far. When I pulled up, the cabin looked just like the pictures. Dark wood siding, a small porch, and not another house in sight. The air was cooler there, heavy with the smell of pine and damp earth. Inside, it was one bedroom, a small bathroom, a kitchen, and a couch in front of a television. The floors creaked, and the furniture was worn, but it was clean. I unpacked slowly, set my bag by the bed, and stepped back outside before the sun went down. The silence hit me hard. I thought I'd like it, but it felt heavier than I expected. There were no cars, no dogs barking in the distance, no voices, just stillness. That first night passed without anything strange. I made dinner, scrolled on my phone, and then went to bed early. The Wi-Fi worked, but there was no cell signal, which didn't bother me at first. I fell asleep to the hum of the refrigerator in the other room, the only sound in the whole cabin. The second night is when everything shifted. I had been asleep for maybe 2 hours when I woke up. At first, I thought it was just because the bed was too quiet. I wasn't used to sleeping without the noise of the city outside. I reached for my phone out of habit. That's when I saw it. A new message from the Airbnb host. It wasn't long, only one sentence. "You need to leave the property immediately." I sat there in the dark, the glow from my screen lighting my hands. My stomach sank as I read it again. The timestamp showed it had just been sent minutes ago. My first thought was that maybe it was a mistake. But before I could process it, another message appeared. "Get out now. Do not wait." My mouth went dry. There was no explanation, no reason, just urgency. It was after midnight, and I was surrounded by woods miles from the nearest road. The messages didn't feel like something casual. They felt like a warning. I sat on the bed, listening. The cabin was silent. My own heartbeat sounded louder than anything else. I thought about ignoring it, waiting until morning, but the tone of those words stuck in my chest. Whoever sent them wanted me gone now, not later. I pulled my bag up onto the bed and started shoving clothes into it. Every sound I made felt too loud. The zip of a bag, the thump of shoes hitting the floor. I kept glancing at the thin curtains, imagining someone outside the windows. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. When I was packed, I stood at the door for a long time, hand on the knob, heart pounding. Stepping outside meant walking through complete darkness. Nothing but trees pressing in on every side. The porch light was weak, barely lighting the steps. My car sat only a few feet away, but even that distance felt exposed. I forced myself to open the door. The air outside was damp and cold. The woods looked like a wall of black. I hurried down the steps, gravel crunching under my boots, my bag thumping against my leg. I could feel the dark pressing against my skin, every instinct screaming to get into the car. I unlocked it with shaking hands, tossed the bag in the passenger seat, and slid behind the wheel. The sound of the doors locking was the first thing that made me feel a little safer. I started the engine, headlights cutting into the trees. For a second, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the beam, something shifting between the trunks. My stomach clenched, but I didn't let myself look long enough to know for sure. I put the car in gear and drove. The dirt road twisted back and forth through the woods, and every turn made me feel like I was being funneled deeper instead of out. The trees seemed closer than before, their branches arching overhead, my headlights barely reaching 20 feet in front of me. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see another pair of headlights or a figure in the road behind me. But it was just darkness. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they hurt. My heart didn't slow down until I finally saw the faint glow of a streetlight ahead where the dirt road met the main highway. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station 20 miles away. The bright lights of the parking lot felt unreal after the suffocating dark of the woods. I pulled in, shut the engine off, and just sat there for a few minutes, trying to steady my breathing. When I looked back at my phone, the messages were still there. 2 short lines, both from the host's account. Nothing else followed them. No explanation, no apology, just those blunt instructions. I opened the Airbnb app to check the listing again. It was gone. The host's profile was gone too. It was as if the place had never existed. I didn't go back, and I didn't contact Airbnb about it. I didn't want to explain why I left in the middle of the night, why I had believed those messages without proof of danger. But I know the fear I felt was real. The words were urgent, desperate. Whoever sent them knew exactly where I was, alone, in the middle of the woods, with nothing but trees pressing in around me. What stays with me is the silence. The way the woods held it so tightly, the way it seemed to press against the cabin walls. I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I had ignored those messages, gone back to sleep, and waited for morning, maybe someone would have been at that cabin with me by the time the sun came up. Leaving in the dark was terrifying, but I know I made the right choice. Something or someone wanted me out, and I don't want to ever know why. When I booked the Airbnb, I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a place where I could stay for a few nights while visiting the area. The listing showed a small one-bedroom cabin tucked back off a dirt road, with wood-paneled walls and basic furniture. It looked simple, quiet, and private. The reviews mentioned how peaceful it was, and I figured that was enough. When I pulled up, the cabin looked exactly as described. A gravel driveway, a small porch with 2 chairs, and a door that opened into a living room with a couch and a small television. To the left was a short hallway leading to a bedroom and a bathroom. The kitchen was small but clean, with enough to cook simple meals. Everything about it felt normal. I brought my bag into the bedroom and started unpacking. That's when I noticed the closet. It had sliding doors that squeaked loudly when I pushed them aside. At first, I thought it was just empty space with a couple of hangers dangling from the bar. But when I looked down at the floor of the closet, I saw something odd pushed against the back wall. It was a safe. A heavy, black safe, the kind you'd see in a hotel or office, only larger. It looked out of place in the cabin, like it didn't belong there. It was wedged tight in the corner, flush against the walls. There were scratches around it on the wood floor, like it had been dragged into place. Curiosity got the better of me. I knelt down and ran my hand along the front. It was solid metal with a heavy door and a number pad. The screen was dark, and when I pressed a button, nothing lit up. It looked old, maybe unused, maybe dead. I tugged on the handle, but it didn't move. Whatever was inside, if anything, was locked tight. I remember feeling uneasy right away. I couldn't understand why the owners hadn't mentioned it. Why would you leave a safe like that in a rental? My mind went to obvious things. Maybe it was too heavy to move. Maybe they stored old paperwork or tools they didn't need anymore. Still, it bothered me. I shut the closet door and tried to shake it off. I made some food, watched television, and then got ready for bed. I told myself it was nothing, just a forgotten safe that had nothing to do with me. But that night, something happened that made me realize it wasn't so simple. I had been asleep for maybe an hour when I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought I was dreaming. It was faint, irregular, a dull thud that seemed to come from inside the room. I stayed still, listening, and then I heard it again. Metal shifting, scraping against wood. My stomach tightened. The sound was coming from the closet. I sat up slowly in bed, staring at the sliding doors. Another thud, this one sharper, like the safe had jerked against the wall. The sound was unmistakable. Something heavy moving inside the closet, rattling against the wood floor. I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen, as the noise continued in bursts. The safe shook, banged, and scraped, like something was pushing from inside it, trying to get out. The noise would go on for a few seconds, then stop, leaving me in silence, my chest tight, my ears straining. Then it would start again. The first thought that crossed my mind was that maybe an animal had gotten inside somehow, but it didn't make sense. The safe was solid metal. There were no vents, no cracks big enough for anything to crawl in. And the way it moved, it wasn't scratching or squeaking. It was shifting its entire weight, hitting the floor hard enough that I could feel it through the bed frame. I couldn't bring myself to get up. I didn't want to slide open those closet doors and see it moving. The banging went on off and on for what felt like hours. Sometimes it was so violent that I thought the safe might tip over. Then, without warning, it stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I sat there in bed, wide awake, staring at the closet, every part of me tense. The air in the room felt heavier, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. I never really fell back asleep that night. I just waited for morning. When daylight finally filled the room, I worked up the nerve to check the closet. My hands shook as I slid the doors open. The safe was exactly where it had been, only now there were deep grooves in the floor where it had shifted. The wood had splintered in places, clear marks showing it had been dragged back and forth in the night. I backed away from it, my mind racing. There was no way I had imagined that. The evidence was right there in front of me. The safe had moved, and it had moved with force. I thought about leaving right then, but part of me wanted to understand. I pulled out my phone, but there was no service inside the cabin. I thought about walking outside to see if I could get a signal, but the idea of leaving the bedroom made me hesitate. My instincts told me not to linger. Still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the floor had shifted? Maybe the cabin was uneven, the safe sliding from weight or vibration. But the gouges in the floor didn't look like something that happened by accident. They looked like something had been forcing it, dragging it back and forth. That night, I tried to convince myself it wouldn't happen again. I locked the bedroom door, though I knew it wouldn't help much if the safe started moving. I left the light on, lying in bed with my eyes fixed on the closet. And again, sometime after midnight, the noise began. Slow at first, just a faint rattle of metal, then louder, harder, more violent. The safe slammed against the walls of the closet, the floor creaking under its weight. It went on for long stretches, then stopped, then started again. I sat in bed, every muscle stiff, too afraid to even breathe loudly. At one point, the banging was so intense that I swore the safe was going to break through the wall. I could feel the vibrations through the floorboards, through the mattress. It wasn't subtle. Whatever was happening inside that safe, it wasn't something natural. By the time morning came, I had already made up my mind. I packed my bag quickly, shoved everything into the car, and didn't even bother cleaning up. I didn't eat, didn't check anything twice. I just left. As I drove away, I kept replaying it in my head. The weight of that safe slamming around in the closet, the deep grooves carved into the floor. I thought about what might be inside. I thought about how someone had dragged it there and left it, locked up tight, hidden away in a closet for strangers to discover. The worst part is I'll never know. I didn't report it to the owner, didn't leave a review, didn't say anything to anyone. I just left it behind. But sometimes, when I think about that cabin, I imagine the next guest sliding open the closet doors, noticing the safe tucked in the corner, and thinking it's just a forgotten piece of furniture. I imagine them lying in bed at night, hearing the first faint rattle of metal, the dull thud of something heavy shifting on the floor. And I wonder how many people will stay there before someone is brave or foolish enough to try opening it. I booked the Airbnb weeks before the trip. It looked simple, tucked away on the edge of a small town with a bit of land around it. The photos showed a modest cabin with wood siding and a gravel driveway that curved behind a cluster of trees. It wasn't luxurious, but it had what I wanted: quiet, space, and a place to disconnect. The host's profile had a generic smiling picture and a short bio. The reviews weren't many, maybe 4 or 5, but they were all positive. People wrote that it was peaceful, private, and exactly as described. I didn't think much more about it when I hit book. When I arrived, the place matched the photos, maybe a little rougher around the edges. The gravel drive was full of weeds pushing through, and the cabins with siding looked more weathered than in the pictures. The key was where the instructions said it would be, tucked in a small lockbox on the porch. I remember pausing for a moment when I opened the door, because the smell inside was heavier than I expected, like damp wood and something faintly metallic. Still, it wasn't enough to make me question the stay. The place had power, running water, and enough space. The first night went fine. I cooked something simple on the small stove, sat outside for a while listening to the crickets, and went to bed early. The bed wasn't the most comfortable, but I didn't mind. It was just a place to sleep. By the second day, I settled into the rhythm of the place. I walked the property a little, though there wasn't much around it. The cabin backed into dense woods, and across the dirt road in front was just more land stretching out. The nearest neighbor was far enough away that I didn't hear or see anyone. That was the appeal, I thought. Privacy. I spent the morning reading, the afternoon exploring the nearby trails, and by evening I was tired enough to stay indoors. It wasn't until the third day that I noticed something strange. I wanted to check what time checkout was and whether I needed to do anything specific before leaving. I opened the Airbnb app on my phone, went to my trips, and tapped the listing. Instead of showing me the details, I got an error message. I tried again, refreshed the page, and then went back to the search tab to see if I could find the listing another way. It was gone. Not just the listing, but the host's profile too. When I tapped their name in my message history, it came up blank, like the account had been erased. For a moment, I thought it was just a glitch. Maybe the app was down or my signal was bad. I walked around outside with my phone, holding it up, trying to get more bars. The signal flickered between 1 bar of LTE and nothing. I tried switching to Wi-Fi, but the cabin didn't have any. It was just me and a weak cell signal. I went back inside and sat down, staring at the screen. I could still see the message history I'd had with the host, but the profile photo was gone, and the name just showed as user. No other details. No trace of the person who'd listed the cabin. That was the first moment a sense of unease settled in. I wasn't supposed to be here, I thought. Not in an immediate, illegal way, but in the sense that the structure I relied on, the booking, the reviews, the proof of where I was, had disappeared. I told myself it didn't matter. I had the key, I had the cabin, and I'd already paid. I still had 2 nights left, and I could leave when it was time. But it gnawed at me. I didn't like the thought of being in a place that wasn't really accounted for anymore. That night, I kept hearing things outside. Small sounds at first, branches cracking, something moving through the brush. It wasn't unusual for the woods, but each time it happened, I sat up straighter. At one point, I thought I saw a light through the trees, faint and quick, like someone carrying a flashlight deeper in the woods. It might have been my eyes playing tricks. Still, I double-checked the door locks before going to bed. The next morning, I walked the property again, this time slower, paying more attention. Around the back of the cabin, near where the tree line thickened, I noticed the ground was disturbed. Not freshly dug, but scuffed, as if something heavy had been dragged. The grass and dirt showed a faint path toward the woods. I followed it a little ways but stopped when it grew too dark under the canopy. I told myself it was probably just an animal trail, but in the back of my mind, I kept replaying that missing listing. Later, I drove into the small town to pick up a few groceries. While I was there, I tried loading the Airbnb app again. The cabin wasn't listed. I searched by the town name, by keywords, by scrolling through everything nearby. Nothing. It was as if it had never existed. That evening, I had trouble relaxing. I kept my phone charged and within reach, even though the signal barely held. When the sounds outside started again, I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, listening. Something was moving around the side of the cabin, slower this time, as if it knew I was listening. At one point, I heard gravel crunch near the driveway. I barely slept. Every sound seemed magnified in the dark. When dawn came, I was already packed. I knew I wasn't going to stay the final night. The feeling of being erased from the system, paired with whatever was outside, was enough. As I carried my bag out to the car, I noticed something on the porch that hadn't been there before. A folded piece of paper. No writing on the outside. I didn't open it. I didn't want to. I tossed it into the back seat with my bag and got in the car. Driving away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The cabin sat back from the road, partly hidden by trees, and I half expected to see someone step out onto the porch as I left. But no one did. When I reached town again, I tried the app one last time. The host's profile was still gone. The cabin wasn't listed. It felt as though I had stayed in a place that wasn't meant to be found, like I had walked into some space that had been deliberately pulled off the map. I didn't open the paper until I was miles away, at a gas station on the edge of the highway. Sitting there in the driver's seat, I finally unfolded it. It was blank, just a piece of paper, folded once down the middle, left for me to find. That was enough. I crumpled it, tossed it in the trash can, and got back on the road. The rest of the drive home, I kept thinking about how easy it would be to make a place appear real online, how easy it would be to vanish it after someone was already there. The photos, the reviews, even the host profile, all of it could disappear in seconds. And once you were inside, miles from anyone else, you'd have no way of proving you were ever supposed to be there. I never reported it. I never contacted Airbnb. I didn't want to explain why I had stayed in a place that vanished halfway through my trip, or what it meant that I found that folded paper on the porch. I just moved on, But every time I book somewhere now, I think back to that cabin. I think about how it felt to realize the ground beneath my feet wasn't as solid as I thought, and how quickly the system I trusted had left me completely alone in the woods. I booked the Airbnb because I wanted quiet. The listing showed a small cabin tucked back off a gravel road, surrounded by thick trees, with a fire pit and a small porch. The photos made it look like a peaceful place to stay for a week, far from traffic, far from people, far from work. When I arrived, the cabin was even more isolated than I expected. The road that led to it was narrow, twisting, and filled with potholes. By the time I pulled up, I couldn't hear anything but my car engine and the steady hum of insects in the woods. The cabin itself was plain, with wood siding faded gray from years of weather. The inside was simple too. One bedroom, a small kitchen, a couch, a table, and a bathroom. It smelled faintly of pine and old smoke, as if fires had been burned inside for years. I dropped my bag by the couch, opened the fridge, and found it empty except for a half-used bottle of water someone had left behind. That first day, I unpacked a little, sat outside on the porch with a book, and tried to settle in. As the sun went down, the forest around the cabin grew darker fast. It was the kind of dark where the trees turned into a wall of black, and the silence grew heavier than during the day. I cooked something on the small stove, ate while standing at the counter, and tried to shake off the feeling that I was more cut off than I'd realized. By the time I was ready for bed, I kept checking the locks on the doors without even thinking about it. The first night, I woke up around midnight to a faint buzzing sound. At first I thought it was just some kind of big insect outside the window, but when I pushed myself up and looked through the blinds, I saw something moving in the air. A small drone hovered just beyond the glass, its red and green lights blinking as it floated there. The sound was low but steady, the kind of high-pitched hum that drills into your ears. I froze, just watching it. It didn't move away right away. It tilted slightly, its small camera pointed directly at the window. After a long minute, it drifted sideways and then up, circling the cabin once before disappearing into the trees. I told myself it was nothing serious. Someone nearby must have been flying it, maybe a neighbor or a kid in the area. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I went back to bed but kept waking up every time I thought I heard that hum again. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a house nearby I hadn't noticed when I drove in. Maybe someone had landed out here and liked to fly their drone at night. But when I stepped outside and looked around, I couldn't see any sign of another property. No driveways, no houses through the trees, nothing but woods in every direction. I spent most of that day trying to relax, reading on the porch, walking a little way down the road, even sitting by the fire pit though I didn't light it. But the whole time, I kept glancing at the trees, wondering who had flown that drone and from where. That night, it came back. I heard the hum before I even saw it. I was standing in the kitchen, rinsing a plate, when the sound started up outside. I moved toward the window slowly and pulled the curtain back just enough to look out. The drone was there again, hovering in the same spot as before, its small lights blinking against the dark. This time, it didn't just float. It moved along the side of the cabin, stopping at each window, pausing as if it was looking inside, then circling to the next. I turned off the lights inside, hoping it couldn't see me as clearly. From the bedroom, I watched it pass again. It stayed for what felt like forever, circling, hovering, and then finally flying off toward the trees once more. I lay in bed for hours afterward, unable to sleep. Every small sound outside made me think it had returned. By the third night, I was tense before the sun even went down. I tried keeping the blinds closed and the lights low, but sure enough, around the same time, the buzzing started again. This time, I decided to step outside, thinking maybe I could see where it was coming from. As soon as I opened the door, the drone shifted. It rose higher and followed me as I walked across the yard. I tried ignoring it, walking around the perimeter of the cabin, pretending I wasn't bothered, but it mirrored my movements. When I stepped to the left, it adjusted. When I walked toward the trees, it floated closer, always keeping the same distance between us. The sound was constant, drilling into my ears. Finally, I went back inside, and after a few more minutes, it left. The pattern didn't stop. Every night it showed up. Sometimes it hovered at the same window for a long time. Other times it circled faster, moving from one side of the cabin to the other. I couldn't tell who was flying it or why. The road was so remote that I never saw another car, never heard anyone nearby. Whoever it was had to be close, though close enough to see the cabin and control the drone each night. On the 5th day, I decided to leave early. My stay was supposed to last the whole week, but I couldn't take the constant unease anymore. I packed during the day, keeping everything ready by the door. When night came, I tried to ignore the sound when it returned, telling myself I'd be gone in the morning. But that last night was different. The drone didn't just circle the cabin, came closer. I heard the hum louder than ever, and when I peeked through the blinds, it was pressed almost against the glass, the small camera lens staring straight in. I dropped the blinds back down and backed away. It stayed like that for hours. Even when I tried to sleep, I could hear it. The hum never faded. The lights flickered through the gaps in the blinds. I didn't sleep at all. At first light, I grabbed my bag, threw it in the car, and drove off without looking back. On the road out, I kept watching the treetops in my mirrors, half expecting to see the drone following overhead. But it didn't. Once I got back to town, I stopped at a gas station and just sat in the car for a while, letting my heartbeat slow down. I never figured out who was behind it. I checked the Airbnb listing again once I had steady service, but the reviews didn't mention anything like what I experienced. No one wrote about drones, about feeling watched, about being followed around the cabin at night. I thought about leaving a review myself, warning people, but I didn't. I didn't want to sound paranoid, and part of me didn't want to think about it anymore. All I knew was that someone out there, in those woods, spent every night watching me through a lens, close enough to see everything I did. And the worst part wasn't the drone itself. It was knowing that whoever was flying it had chosen me in that place at that time, and I had no idea why. I booked the Airbnb because I wanted to clear my head for a few days. It had been a rough stretch at work, and I thought being out in the country, away from everything, would be good for me. The place looked simple from the listing. A 2-bedroom house on the edge of some farmland, with open fields on one side and a line of woods on the other. The reviews all said the same thing. It was quiet, private, and perfect for a weekend. That was exactly what I thought I needed. When I pulled in, the place looked a little more worn than it had in the photos. The paint on the siding was faded, the grass in the yard was too long, and one of the shutters was barely hanging on. But it was clean enough inside. The furniture was old but functional, the kitchen stocked with the basics, and the beds made up with fresh sheets. I told myself the little details didn't matter. I wasn't here for luxury. I just wanted space and quiet. The first night went fine. I cooked myself some food, sat on the couch for a while, and then went to bed early. It was so quiet out there that I kept waking up at the smallest sounds, tree branches shifting in the wind, the occasional creak from the house settling. I wasn't used to that kind of silence where every little thing stood out, but I figured I'd get used to it. The second night, I noticed something odd. I was brushing my teeth before bed when I saw headlights sweep across the side of the house. I thought maybe it was just someone driving down the road, but when I looked out the window, I realized the road wasn't visible from that angle. The lights seemed to come from the driveway itself. By the time I got to the front window, the headlights were gone. I went outside and looked around, but there was nothing there. No car, no tracks in the gravel except for mine. I stood in the yard for a while, listening. The fields stretched out quiet, and the woods at the back stood black and heavy. After a few minutes, I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to push it out of my head. The next morning, I noticed something else. When I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, I saw shoe prints in the dirt at the side of the house. They weren't mine, I hadn't walked over there. The prints went from the grass to the siding and then back again, as if someone had stood right against the wall for a while. I stared at them longer than I should have, my stomach tightening. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the owner had come by for some reason before I arrived and I just hadn't noticed. Maybe the prints were old, but they looked fresh. The dirt was still damp from last night's dew, and the edges of the prints were sharp. That day, I stayed uneasy. I read for a while, went for a walk along the edge of the fields, tried to distract myself, but I couldn't shake the thought of someone being near the house while I slept. By evening, I was on edge. I made sure all the doors were locked, pulled the blinds down tight, and left a light on in the living room. Around midnight, I heard it, a car pulling slowly into the driveway. I lay in bed, listening as the crunch of gravel grew louder, then stopped. The engine cut, and then there was nothing. No door opening, no footsteps, just silence. I didn't move. I stayed in bed, heart pounding, waiting. After a few minutes, I heard the faintest sound outside, a soft scuff against the porch steps. Someone was there. I stared at the dark ceiling, every muscle in my body tense. Minutes passed, but it felt longer. Then the sound came again, this time on the porch itself, like weight shifting on the boards. I wanted to look out, to see who it was, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I heard the engine start again. Gravel crunched, and the sound faded until it was gone. In the morning, I forced myself outside. On the porch, the dirt showed more prints. Someone had been standing right at the door. That was when I decided I wasn't staying another night. My booking had one night left, but I couldn't take the thought of whoever kept coming back. I packed my things, double-checked that I hadn't left anything, and loaded the car. Before I pulled out, I walked one last lap around the house. In the grass behind the place, I found more footprints, leading to the edge of the woods. They didn't go in very far, just to the tree line, but they were clear enough. Whoever it was had been circling the house, watching from more than one angle. The drive back to town felt longer than it should have. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see a car following me. But the road stayed empty, just fields and trees flashing by. When I got home, I checked the listing again. The reviews still said the same things: quiet, private, peaceful. No one mentioned anything like what I'd experienced. I thought about leaving a review myself, but in the end I didn't. Part of me didn't want to relive it by writing it down, and part of me wondered if anyone would even believe it. The thing that stuck with me wasn't just the footprints or the headlights, it was how careful the person had been. They never knocked, never tried the door, never left anything obvious. They just circled, watched, and left. They wanted me to know without ever showing themselves. That was the worst part. I thought I had booked a few days of peace in the middle of nowhere. Instead, I ended up spending the nights lying awake in the dark, realizing how easy it would be for someone to come out to a place like that, watch through the windows, and leave without ever being caught. And I know now that when people say a rental is quiet and private, that can mean being alone in a way that isn't comforting at all. It can mean being vulnerable with no one else around to notice if something goes wrong. That was the last time I stayed in an isolated Airbnb. I still travel, but I only book places in neighborhoods now, with people close enough that I don't have to lie awake listening for footsteps outside. Because once you've been through nights like that, once you've seen the proof in the dirt that someone was right outside while you slept, you don't forget it. You never forget it.